Good morning. Like all good Toastmasters, we would like to start on time. My name is Joe Ido, your Program Quality Director and host for today's Creating an Impact Online and in Person. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded to our District 56 YouTube channel. If you do not want your picture on social media, please keep your camera off. First, let's go over a few rules and protocol. We would love for this to be an interactive session. Feel free to leave your video on, but please mute your mic until you're ready to talk. Let's keep in mind our Toastmaster core values: integrity, respect, service, and excellence throughout the entire meeting. Without further ado, let's introduce your instructor. Today, distinguished Toastmaster Andrea Tantillo will lead us in a discussion about creating an impact in our presentations. Andrea joined Toastmasters in 2016, earned her Distinguished Toastmasters in 2018, and is just 2 projects away from completing her first 2 tasks. She's VP PR for Spaced Out Toastmasters and has served as club sponsor for Tenants Talkers Toastmasters. She holds a master's degree in strategic communication from Purdue University and works as a senior communication coordinator for the Houston-Galveston Area Council. In her spare time, she manages her cat's Instagram account with more than 6,000 followers. Today, you won't be sitting here and listening. We're expecting you to ask questions and share your own tips as we explore some of tips for creating an impact in our presentation. Please help me welcome distinguished Toastmaster Andrea Tantillo.
Thank you, Joe. I think it's kind of fun that you said distinguished Toastmaster Andrea Tantillo, because when I first joined Toastmasters and I heard people getting introduced that way, I think that that was my very first motivation for why I wanted to earn a Distinguished Toastmasters recognition, so that I could hear somebody introduce me that way. And I think that this may actually be the first time that that has ever happened. So thank you for letting me do this presentation today, and thank you for introducing me that way and helping me reach that bucket list goal, I think. Also, thank you to everyone who's come in today. I really appreciate you being here, and I hope that we're all able to learn a lot. Some of the strategies that we're going to talk about are some that you already know and you're already using. Some may be some that are just a general reminder, and some may be new or surprising. But I hope that we all are able to come away with today's online learning leadership elective with some new or different strategies that we can use when we're trying to create impact in our presentations. This presentation is coming from a panel discussion that I led at my club Spaced Out Toastmasters back in January. We were in the middle of the pandemic, of course, and I just expected that all of the conversation about how to create an impact was going to revolve around delivery. And while a lot of it did, a lot more actually revolved around content. And that surprised me, but it really shouldn't have, because, you know, of course, content is important, but it seems like now more than ever, making sure that we have a good message, what we're saying and how we're saying it, is extremely important. And today I'm going to share some of the information and strategies that I got from the Spaced Out Toastmasters, including clips from that panel discussion. We're going to discuss how delivery is part of creating impact. Today, we're going to also discuss how content is part of creating impact. And we're going to talk a little bit about adjusting from being in an online situation to back in person, because that's where we're headed now, and I cannot be happier about that. And I also want to let you know that I am compiling an ebook of these strategies to share with the district. It's going to include all the strategies from the panel discussion, and I hope to include some strategies from you all today. But if you don't want your strategies in that ebook, don't worry, and don't let that stop you from participating today. Just send me an email. I'm going to put my email in the chat here, but just send me an email if you don't want your strategies or comments included in my ebook, and I won't include them, but I do want to hear from you today, because that's what's going to make this presentation so much better. It's going to be everybody else participating. So let's get started. The panelists from Spaced Out Toastmasters, in addition to me, were Patricia Carreras, Lucy Aletti, Carolyn Cooney, and Fran Kantz. They are all distinguished Toastmasters, and they are all longtime members of Toastmasters, and particularly Spaced Out Toastmasters. I am posting their bios in the chat in case you're more interested in about them. Next, I want to tell you a little bit about what I define as creating an impact. And that is simply getting the audience to do something. Maybe you want to have them laugh or be entertained. Perhaps you want them to change their mind or take some sort of action, or maybe you just want to connect with them. And you can do that with your delivery, which I'm sure we all know. You have body language, you have eye contact, and you have vocal variety. And here's a few tips and techniques to remind you of how we can use those. For body language, when we're online, we need to make sure that we frame our gestures in our screen. When we're online, we have a much smaller screen than when we're in the room where we have this huge amount of space. Or if you have a widescreen camera like me, you have an awful lot of space too. In the room, you can walk around and do things. When you're tethered to your computer, you're pretty much standing in one spot. You also want to make sure that your gestures and your body language is deliberate. You don't have to move if you don't need to move. And there's nothing wrong with standing still with your hands to your side or sitting on your desk if you don't have a reason for your gesture. But regardless of what kind of body language you want, it's always good to practice to make sure it's the most effective that it can be. For eye contact, when we're online, you have to look at the camera. That is the only way the people on the other side know that you're making eye contact with them. You can glance around at your notes or at other things if you need to, but you want to return to the camera as often and as much as possible. Otherwise, you're breaking that critical eye contact. On the flip side, when you're in person, you can't just stare at one person. That's awkward and uncomfortable for that person. I often practice my eye contact, and actually not just my eye contact, my whole presentations I practice with my husband. And that's how I developed a little bit of that creepy one person staring eye contact. So to make sure that when I'm running through my presentation at home that I'm making eye contact with people other than just my husband, I put some stuffed animals around the room and I make eye contact with them. But whatever technique you use to shift your eye contact, just make sure you practice so that you're ready to do that when you make your presentation. And vocal variety. Online, we usually have a microphone pretty close to us. Mine's right here by my face. So I'm speaking in a conversational tone, and you're going to be able to pick up the nuances if I lower my voice pretty low, or if I need to speak up and I don't have to project that much. If you're using your webcam, you might have to speak up a little more because it's a little farther away, but it's a lot easier online to project and to use your voice than it is whenever you're in the room, because unless you're mic'd, you've got carpet and a whole bunch of other people between you and the back of the room being able to hear you. So you're going to make sure that you have your volume correct when you're in person. And it's not just about volume. Your vocal variety and your tone and your pitch is really important. Because if I said, wow, I'm really glad that we're here today. Or if I said, wow, I'm really glad that we're here today. It's the same words, but the first one, you probably don't want to hear from me. And the second one, I hope that you do when I use that kind of vocal variety. But regardless of what my vocal variety is, I need to practice or at least be aware of how I want to use my voice and how I want you to respond based on what I'm doing. So now let's hear a little bit from our friends at Spaced Out Toastmasters.
Try to stand up in front of the camera to keep the body language, because if not, obviously body language is almost non-existent.
Just stand up. How many times have you been in a Toastmasters meeting when you're in person and you gave your presentation sitting down? I'm going to say none. I have never done that. And unless I had to, I don't think I would in the room. But when we're seated, when we're online, often we're seated. And that's okay if we're in a work situation or we're in a long meeting or we're working on an online leadership elective where it's going to be more comfortable to sit down for an hour than to stand. But if we're given a 5 to 7 minute presentation, maybe we should think about standing up. We have so much more control of our body and our voice, and we have a lot more space where we could do a little bit more gestures and have a little bit more body language. And speaking of our gestures, we need to think about our gestures and our appearances online. Let's hear from Carolyn Cooney.
Try to
It's been fun transitioning to the virtual world. I had to learn to take my big expressions that you can't see and make them really relevant for the screen. Did I want somebody to think? Did I want them to move forward? Which hand did I use to show the future? What I've noticed in watching other presentations is that some of the women I enjoy watching more have done a little extra for their hair and their makeup. They're very well groomed, they have appropriate clothing on for whatever the presentation is, and they tend to wear a little bit more makeup with the blush and perhaps a little lipstick so that their face is well defined. The other thing I've admired so much is some of the professional conferences I have to go to that perhaps have a panel of 4. While the one person is speaking, the other 3 people are looking very attentively into the camera.
So she's saying that people are looking attentively in the camera and showing respect for the other speakers, which when we're in the room, that's easy to do. We're paying attention. We're not fiddling with our phone or checking emails or doing anything like that. But when we're online, it's easy to split our attention. So if you've got your camera on and you're paying attention to the other speaker, just make sure that we can see that you're paying attention to the other speaker. And she mentioned our gestures. And not only do we have to scale them for size, we need to scale them for speed too. If you do this, you stand the chance of your gestures being a little bit blurry because they're too fast and the camera just can't keep up. So you need to be a little bit slower so that people can see what you're trying to do with your gestures. That feels uncomfortable to me, but that is really what we need to do so that it is effective online. And golly, did you hear what she said about hair and makeup and appearance? I really thought that one of our COVID wins was going to be that we could roll out of bed at 8:55 for a meeting at 9 o'clock and not worry about hair and makeup. And now she's saying we need to wear more. Okay, I guess she's right. I guess that's good to know. So what else can we do to create impact in our delivery? Let's hear from Fran Cans.
I like animation where I can move around and do things. And if that kind of captivates the audience, then I've got them with me and they'll hopefully listen to the rest of my speech. Again, this isn't a thing I can do now, but if I watch my audience reaction, and I like to watch my audience reaction, and depending on what they do or how they react, I respond and change my direction or my words or my movement.
That is so much easier when you're in person. You can notice your audience's response and you could scale something back or you could really ramp it up. But when you're online, I mean, most of the time people have their cameras off, so you can't have any idea what someone's name on a screen is reacting to your presentation. And if you have your camera on, maybe you can respond to someone, maybe you can see them. But if you spend too much time looking at the gallery view, you're going to break that eye contact with everybody else in the room. And you know, like we said earlier, eye contact is so important. So do you risk looking at the gallery view and sacrifice that eye contact? So now I want to hear from you. Before we move into talking about content, I want to hear how you physically create an impact in your presentations. You can type it in the chat or you can unmute your mic and speak up. So now's the time.
Hi, I always try to keep the eye contact like we were taught into the camera so that people know I'm talking to them instead of looking around like this. And I think that you get greater participation that way. And also in any time I have the opportunity to engage the audience virtually, I try to do that either by comments or by opening up like you just did, asking people to unmute and speak up.
Thank you, Michelle. That's a really good tip. Margaret Harrison says, smile and have a good time. Yeah, if we don't look like we're having a good time, how's anybody going to have a good time with us, right? I have attended a lot of meetings. We do a lot of public workshops for my job, and I have been on, it's the first time I've been on the receiving end of being a presenter while I'm waiting for someone to speak or type something in the chat. One of my coworkers said that Zoom minutes are a lot longer than real minutes, and I didn't really understand what that was until just now, because while I'm waiting to see if anybody else has any tips, this feels like a really long time. So if anybody else has anything they'd like to share, now's the time. Okay.
I always struggle with, you recommend standing up, but that I feel that if I go back, then I am losing that eye contact, especially in an online environment. In an in-person meeting, it's obviously much easier to have eye contact while you're standing up. But that's what I keep struggling with is, should I stand up or should I be close to the camera?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because you have so many things that we haven't really thought about, or that we never had to think about until this past year that we're having to think about now. And that had never occurred to me. I just assumed the camera could see me, but maybe it can't.
Hi, I think before we do the presentation, we need to practice, and that is a Zoom test site that you can log in and test your position, test your mic and everything. Then you can see when you're standing up, are you having a good presented image, or you have a good sounding around you. That's very important.
Thank you, Cece. That's such a good idea. I practiced before this presentation because I was going to stand up to demonstrate, but there was no way that I could stand up and get my chair out of the way without tripping myself, so that you could see all of me and you could just see the part of me that I'm not interested in sharing at this meeting. So yeah, practice is really, really important. That is a very good tip. That's easy to not think about.
One of the things I would like to comment on is in the opposite direction of what you are talking about, not the speaker so much as the listeners. As a speaker, I look at the audience, and in my home meeting, no one puts their name up. They always put their face up, real life face. And I so enjoy seeing them. But sometimes they bring the dog in to sit in their lap. Most of the time, they have a cup of something to eat or drink. or their son or daughter or grandchild walks around behind them and whispers in their ear. And those things are all horribly distracting to the speaker. To me, if you're going to be a speaker, you need to be the center of attention right there. All I can see is you, Andrea, a little cloudy around the outside, but I see you. But I focus on you. Whereas if you had people walking around you, I would be distracted in my speech. So I believe maybe this is part of your lesson later on, I don't know, but in the delivery, we also have to remember the receipt of the delivery, that people should be paying attention to what you are saying. That's my thought.
That is such a good tip. And I have to admit, I am guilty of it now. And if he showed up, I might put my cat in here because I love him so much and think that everybody else needs to love him. But you're right. I'm not just doing this for me. I'm doing this for everybody. And everybody else is doing this for everybody too. So we need to be respectful and pay attention to each other and pay attention to what we're doing. Joe, are there any more questions or any more hands raised or anything?
Nothing in chat. And I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on to content now. And like I said, it surprised me that we were talking about that, but it shouldn't have, because it's important. And just like Carolyn was just saying, our audience's attention span has the potential to be low even before we were online, because we, as a speaker, as a presenter, we had to compete with everything that was also on their mind, everything else they were thinking about. But now we have to compete with everything else they're doing, because when you're online, I guess you're free to do other things. You could check email, you could turn your camera off and look at something else. I mean, you have the opportunity to split your focus a lot. You know, being respectful to the speaker, you wouldn't, but the reality is you do. So you have to make sure that your content and that your presentation is really good, really meaningful, and really effective to keep your audience's attention. So let's hear from our friends at Spaced Out Toastmasters again.
I think that to create impact, our speech needs to be structured. It needs to be extremely clear, the speech, even linear.
A clear, structured, linear speech. That seems simple, but it's so easy for us to try to create a speech that might be a little creative. And instead of going from point A to point B to point C to get our message across, we might go from point A to point C to point X to point B to point D, and maybe never get there. You can be creative if you're effective, but it's easier to be effective if you are linear and you get to your point. Because honestly, if your point doesn't get me to your message, then what in the world are you doing? You might have impact, but it's probably not the impact that you're looking for. So how do we make our messages clear? Let's hear from Carolyn Cooney.
For me, the most important thing is to know what your intent is. Set in your mind an intent that you want to get across to your audience. For example, do you want to inspire, uplift, amuse, stop an action? Whatever your intent is, focus on that. That is the theme underlying everything that you're going to say in that presentation.
You have to know what you're talking about and what you're trying to do. Because if you don't, your audience, won't either. You have to have a purpose, even if it's just to inform or entertain. And you have to remember what it is throughout your presentation. And you also really need to connect with and care about your presentation. Let's learn more about that from Lou Cialetti.
If you have a speaker and you're out there presenting something and it doesn't look like you believe what you're talking about, or you're not excited to make the presentation yourself, then it kind of is hard to involve the audience.
I could not agree with that more. I finished a Pathways project that required me to lead a project at work. I did not enjoy that project, even though it was successful, and I did not enjoy coming back to my club and giving that speech. And it showed. My evaluator got up and said, "Hey, Andrea, we wanted to root for you, but you weren't rooting for you. So by the time you were done, we just wanted you to finish that speech." Ouch. Was that harsh? Yes. Was that true? Also, yes. Was that something I needed to hear? Absolutely. Because if I didn't care about what I was talking about, how could I possibly expect my audience to care about what I was talking about and to go on that journey with me? I couldn't. So let's learn some more from Lou about how we can get people to go on that journey with us.
Basically, what we have to rely on is what Carolyn said. We have to be looking at our content. And content means articulating words, pronunciation, making sure we pronounce words correctly, and enunciate like we are in a TEDx talk. So people don't automatically assume that you don't know what you're talking about because you can't say the word right. I would also mention that you probably need to look at stories that mean something to people, because that seems to resonate mostly as well. Our lives are filled with stories. We need to have stories that relate to the people who are in our audience.
He's so right about that. Has this ever happened to you? You were talking to someone who's probably knows what they're talking about. Maybe they're even an expert in their field, but they got flustered and they used the wrong word or they used bad grammar. And then you started to doubt the accuracy of what they were saying. This happens to me all the time at work. My boss has a tendency to leave the word "not" out of emails. So I'll get an email from her that says, "I need you to talk to Jeff about this." What she meant was, "I need you to not talk to Jeff about this." I know that she has that issue, so I double check every single instruction I get from her by email. But if I didn't know that about her, that could cause some problems. In that case, Jeff is her boss. So if I talk to him about the things she needed me to not talk to him about, well, that could cause trouble for both of us. So she needs to be a little more careful with her language. But I was thinking about, that's an email. When we're giving our presentations, it's not always an email, like almost never an email. And I think that words when we're speaking are a lot more important than when we're emailing, to make sure that we're clear with the words that we're using. My Uncle Ron is a chef, smart guy, trained, knows a lot of stuff, but mixes up his idioms all the time. He'll tell me he didn't go to work today because he was below the weather, or that something was so difficult, it was like finding a camel in a haystack, which honestly seems kind of easy to me. Or the weather that we had this day was just raining all kinds of dogs. That's just makes me think that he's silly. And when he's telling me something that I didn't already know, that I'm trusting him to share the information with, I remember him mixing up those idioms and wonder if what he's telling me, this new information that he's giving me, is it correct? Just because he's got the shoe on the other foot, oops, that one's right. But he's silly sometimes, and that really, really resonates with me, that maybe if he was a little more careful with his language, I would trust what he's telling me in other circumstances. And think to a time when someone told you something that you absolutely could not relate to. Would a personal story have made that easier? Like maybe somebody telling you about their boss using careless language, or their uncle mixing up idioms when you were talking about the importance of using the right words. We all have stories, just like Lou said. We just need to make sure that we take time when we're preparing our presentations to find the stories that will make our presentations more relatable and resonate better with our audiences. And how about just setting yourself up for success?
The introduction sets you up so that your audience has a reason to listen to you even before you start talking. Many people in the audience may not know who you are or why they should listen to you. And that introduction creates an interest. If you know what the audience wants to hear, it helps you set yourself up to be ready to create the impact in the audience that's so eager to hear it.
That is such a good point. How many times have we heard that the way to create an effective structure for our speech is to tell them what we're going to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them what we told them? Can we add a fourth piece to that and have somebody else tell them what we're going to tell them before we tell them what we're going to tell them? Sure, we can. Having that good introduction sets you up to be the right person to make that presentation. And it helps set your audience's expectations. But caution you, if you're setting your audience's expectations, you better be sure that you can meet them. Now it's time to hear from you again. Before we move on to talking about virtual meetings and how we're going to return to in-person meetings, how do you make sure your content has an impact with your audience? You can type it in the chat or you can unmute and talk to us now.
For me, it's always an outline and practice, practice, practice. Husband is definitely on the hook, whether he likes it or not, and whoever else I can get.
I love that, Michelle. Practice, practice, practice. My husband too. I think that I don't know that I have given a presentation at Toastmasters that he couldn't also give because he's heard them all about 100 times.
I'd like to interject if I could.
Sure.
Hey, so one of the things I was having such a hard time trying to figure out what to talk about during the contests that were recently happening. And I spoke with someone and they suggested that I do something that really means something to me. So I was able to come up with that, just really made that motion for me to go ahead and figure out, because and then I started speaking about what really mattered to me. And so that made a big difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Theresa. Just make sure it's personal. Gosh, if you're genuine in your message, you're going to have a way better shot of having a presentation that has more impact, is more meaningful to your audience too. And Margaret Harrison says she's a fan of telling stories to get people to relate and really draw them in. Yeah, that matters, because I've heard, I listen to lots of CDs about Toastmasters from world champions of public speakers that I got from my mentor when I first started. And I'm going to say some names that are old names, like David Brooks and Darren LaCroix and gosh, I want to say Mike Key. And they were saying that people remember a percent of what you tell them and a percent of what you show them. But if you tell stories, they're going to remember those stories. Even if they don't remember exactly what your message was, that those stories are going to resonate and come to play. And that's going to help you have that impact and that lasting impression. Just if you've told a story, that someone's going to remember that and maybe have that action that you're hoping that they'll have.
I think going right along with that is humor. At my club, I am known as the jokester, because whether I'm Toastmaster or whether I'm the speaker or whatever, it just comes natural to me to inject something that I think is funny, and I hope others receive it as funny. So along with telling stories, if at all possible, you put some humor in. Like when you were doing those idioms a minute ago, my screen was off, but if you could see me, I was barrel laughing. Oh, they were really good examples of humor. So I know a lot of speeches are very serious and you have difficulty putting in humor, but you can put in things that are light along with your heavy story. So I believe in humor. Humor will get your audience listening for maybe you're going to say something else that's funny. Who knows?
Thank you, Carolyn. That was a really good point. I think humor makes you feel good, and you want to hear a presentation or a speech that makes you feel good. And I agree that humor or a little bit of levity can give you some relief from an often serious presentation. Carolyn, do you have any tips for how to inject that humor? Are you just naturally funny, or is that something that you have to work at?
In my case, that's just my personality. I mean, whether I'm going grocery shopping or whether I'm in my Sunday school class, I mean, funny things just pop in my head, and sometimes I say what I'm thinking, and it's funny. So no, I know a lot of people who can't tell a joke even because they forget the punchline. So yes, humor is something that I think you're either born with or you're not born with, but you can learn to inject humor along the way. It might not come naturally, but you can, if you're doing a planned speech, you can definitely put some sort of funny antidote in it.
It's a good point. If your speech is planned, I know I try to be funny in table topics sometimes, and then people are just looking at me. I was like, wow, I thought that was funny, but everybody else thinks that's weird, and so maybe not so funny. But that's a really good point. And I know there's a whole path about engaging humor that might help us. One of the projects was to do that table topics presentation, to do impromptu speech in your engaging humor path. And you're given 12 different topics that you hand to the Toastmaster, and they choose 2, and you give impromptu presentations about each of them. And one of them is that you were surprised that you needed to give a eulogy for one of your good friends. And this is in your engaging humor path. And it took me a long time to wrap my head around, does humor belong in that speech? And again, it does. It just helps ease the pain of that speech to be able to put humor in. Fortunately, the Toastmaster did not ask me to do that presentation because that one was the one that really scared me most. And no, I'm not going to do it today either. Joe, do we have any more comments in the chat or any hands raised?
I do not see any, Andrea.
Okay, thank you. We are in the home stretch now. We had to make adjustments when we went from giving our presentations in front of a room full of people to giving our presentations sitting or standing in front of a computer screen. But now we're headed back. We're headed back to hybrid meetings or to fully in-person meetings. And we're going to have to make adjustments again to get ready to go back to those in-person meetings. So let's hear from our friends at Spaced Out Toastmasters again about some of the ways that we're going to have to work to be able to transition back to in-person meetings. First, Lucy Aletti.
I have a struggle with the small screen. What's happening to our body language when eventually we come back to a full room and we're in person? How are we going to resurrect what we did with our gestures? Eye contact, okay, I could stare at the camera and I'm making eye contact, but I can't pick out individuals that I would normally do in an audience.
I've heard that you have to do something 3 times for it to become a habit. Well, I personally believe that it's more than that. We've had long enough to create some habits online that we're going to have to break when we return to in-person. For hybrid meetings, if we're in the room, we're going to have to find that balance between making eye contact with the camera and making eye contact with the people in the room. And also gesturing in our space as well as gesturing in the camera space so that it's not awkward and weird for everybody watching. We also need to make sure that we keep a good pace with what we're talking about. Gosh, it is so easy to speed up or slow down when we're online, especially if we're hearing some feedback from any of the other people. But we're going to have to talk naturally. We need to speak naturally anyway, but we're definitely going to have to speak naturally when we're back in person and in the room. And we also are going to have to check our volume. Let's hear from Carolyn Cooney.
We've gotten used to talking into our computer's microphone, but now we're going to be talking to the back of the audience again. So when you go back in person, you may have to be projecting your voice more, and you're going to have my permission to expand your gestures back to large gestures, not just small gestures that can be seen on the screen. It's going to be a lot of fun for all of us, and we will succeed.
I left that part of the clip in there where she said that we're going to succeed, because I love that she said we're going to succeed and it's going to be fun. What better way to approach this transition back to in person? And gestures and volume are so important, especially gestures. And even in an online meeting, it's easy to forget your space. I was giving a presentation at work last month. It was a 5 to 7 minute presentation. So I thought, as a good Toastmaster, I'm going to stand up when I give this presentation. And because also, like a good Toastmaster, you don't give a presentation without getting some sort of credit, I asked the Toastmaster in the room to give me some feedback after the presentation. Her primary bit of feedback was, why did I gesture so much just around my face and not use the whole space that I'd given myself when I stood up? Well, a year of doing just this is going to be a hard habit to break for sure. And in addition to what we physically have to do with our delivery and our content to get back into the groove of being in person, there's some safety protocols we're going to have to think about when we go back into the room. Let's hear from Carolyn again.
First of all, we're going to have to respect whatever that environment has for social distancing. And it might mean wearing a mask part of the time when you're not speaking. It might mean sitting a little further from each other. So know what your environment is that you're going to be visiting or attending in person. Next is also know if you're doing handshakes or just nods, if you're having contact or not. That's going to be important to respect that club or those people that you're with.
Just like she was saying, that we're going to have to respect each other and respect the rules in the club meetings and the club meeting spaces. And with the rules changing almost daily and our comfort level probably increasing or decreasing almost daily, that's going to take some effort. I don't like people in my space. I also don't like people touching me, but I was okay with Toastmasters handshakes. So when we went back to hybrid meetings a couple of months ago at Spaced Out Toastmasters, I thought that I'd be okay with a handshake. But when the Toastmaster extended his hand to shake mine, I actually went in with an elbow bump, which means I was a little less comfortable than I thought I would be. And maybe we could have worked that out ahead of time, but I feel like there's going to be a lot more of those awkward moments before we get all the way back to normal. And something that's not exactly awkward, but something that is a result of us being online and now being in person. Spaced Out Toastmasters meets once a month at an area restaurant. So there's a lot of social interaction in our meetings as well as a Toastmasters meeting. We've been online for a year. We've been back at hybrid for 2 meetings. And we are so excited to see each other, to catch up and just to be together again, that we've gotten off track a little bit on our meetings and we've run long every time just because it's new and different again. And we're going to have to work at reining that back in and figuring out how to be excited to be around each other and have that social aspect and still stay on track with our Toastmasters meetings. And now I want to hear from you. So before we wrap up today, what adjustments are you going to make or are you already making as we go back from online to hybrid or in-person meetings? Type it in your chat or open your mic and let me know.
Personally, I think a lot of people have been relying more on notes. I definitely have, because it's easier to have notes on your computer screen. And that's going to be a challenge when we actually go back to work or to in-person meetings, is because obviously you're going to give a speech standing up and you're not going to be referring to your notes. The other thing I find is that it's much easier to have props when you're in the house, because you can just reach out and grab stuff off your desk. Whereas if you're going to have props in person, that's going to be a challenge, because you have to carry it and have a place to put it there. So there'll be some setup involved. And the third thing, of course, is walking around, because you want to use the stage. So we have not been used to that. So getting used to that again will be a challenge.
Thank you, Roop. I agree. So does Margaret Harrison. I have to memorize more and walk around more when we're speaking. I've been using notes today. I don't even want to kid myself to pretend like I think that you don't know that. This is a long presentation and I want to make sure I get it all right. This length presentation, I might use notes in the room, because I'm not really sure when we decided that it wasn't okay to have notes. I know that seems to be a thing for us, and we do sound more like we know what we're talking about, and we do come across as more of an authority if we could just say it. But I don't know, one of the first evaluations I got was that if I wasn't going to use notes, I better know my content, because sometimes I get lost in what I'm saying. But that is definitely good points that we're going to have to prepare better when we do our speeches, and not just feel like we can show up and do them without that level of preparation.
I like what you just said about if no notes, no in KNOW, your content. So that kind of runs together nicely for me. It's like a little rhyme. If no notes, know the content. Thank you for all the information you're providing us.
Thank you for that little note. I wrote that down and I circled it. Well, I'm circling it now. I circled it, and I'm going to maybe write that on something big and put it on my screen, that we have an obligation to make sure that we are giving our content in a cohesive and meaningful way. Otherwise, Toastmasters is a safe place to practice, but we're practicing for something else, or at least I know I am, for work. So if I came to work and I didn't know what I was talking about, then I don't think I would be very successful at my job. So yeah, we do need to know our content. Joe, anything else in the chat or in hands raised?
Andrea, I do not see any hands raised at this moment, and nothing in chat. Oh, wait a minute. Fatima, she said, Andrea, with your hybrid meetings, how are you setting up equipment?
That's a great question, Fatima. For our particular meeting, because we meet at a different restaurant every month, then we have to bring that equipment with us. It's not like it was equipment that was set up in the room, which would be much, much easier. The equipment that I bring is a laptop, an external webcam, not the webcam on the laptop. I bring a tripod for the webcam, and I bring a cell phone to share my screen also, and then I bring external speakers to plug into the laptop. When you're doing a hybrid meeting, there's 4 things that are important. The people in the room need to be able to hear and see each other. The people in the room need to be able to hear and see the people online. The people online need to be able to hear and see the people online. And the people online need to be able to hear and see the people in the room. So when we go and we get set up, I launch Zoom, and I would either project the Zoom gallery view on a screen if that's available in the room, or I would just turn my laptop around. I have a pretty large screen laptop, and I would just turn it around so the people at the table could see all the people on Zoom. In fact, one of our members said that they found that when I projected it on the screen, it was really distracting and that she didn't like it. The reason for the cell phone is you log that one into Zoom too, and you have that camera facing the table, facing the people in the room, and it's another person in the gallery view. It's not ideal, but it does give the people online a chance to see everybody in the room. We have the tripod set up facing the lectern, and we ask that all of our speakers get up and go to the lectern. Usually if we're doing our meeting reports, our grammarian report, our listen master report, even sometimes the general evaluator report, we do that from our chairs, but everyone has to go to the lectern so that they can get picked up by the microphone and by the camera so the people online can view them. We also make sure that there's someone who's dedicated to watching the Zoom and making sure that the people on Zoom and online are feeling engaged with and have an opportunity to participate in the meeting. Another thing about that, the first meeting we had that was hybrid was great. The second meeting we had that was hybrid was terrible because the Wi-Fi in that restaurant was bad and we kept losing connection, which is something that we're just going to have to deal with, and something actually that we're going to have to consider if we're going to consider continuing on hybrid, if we're going to be able to have that connection. Does that answer your question? Do you have different equipment that you want to talk about when you have a more static location and it doesn't move around every month?
Thank you, Andrea. We have not gone back to in-person yet, but we're anticipating, and I just wondered, because you said that you were meeting in a restaurant, I knew that that entailed bringing equipment, and I just wanted to know how you were setting it up. Very useful information that you provided. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I got all that information about how to do that. I did not figure that out on my own. I got that information from a Rotary Club that's also doing it, and it just seems to work. That they are in some convention hall or some meeting room that doesn't necessarily have any equipment too, so they gave that tip. I'll see if I can find that online and see if Joe can push that out to everybody. Joe?
I do not see any hands raised or anything in chat.
Okay. So today we've talked about creating impact with our delivery and considered ways to translate what we're doing online back into in-person through our delivery and through our safety protocols. But a big theme today has been about content and how we make sure our content is effective for creating that impact. Because if we don't know what we're doing and we don't know what we want our audience to do, there's a good chance that our presentation is going to fall flat. However, I want to leave you with one more tip from Spaced Out Toastmasters about what I think is probably the most important thing that we can do to make sure that we create impact. And it's from our friend Fran Cans.
Be yourself, have fun, and don't worry so much about whether you're reaching, am I getting to this point? Have I got enough time? What am I going to do? You know, just go with it.
Be yourself and have fun. I mean, what better advice can you get than that? Because if you're having fun and you're being genuine, the rest should just fall in place. Joe just posted a link to a survey. We'd love to have your feedback from today. That helps us all do a better job. And this is it. We promised you an hour and looks like we're going to give you an hour. If you have any questions, we can talk about them now. We've had great feedback throughout this event, and I really do appreciate all of that. And I want to, one, remind you that I'm creating an ebook out of all of our content from the panel in January and from today. If you don't want your content to be included in the ebook, please just send me an email and I'll make sure to omit that. And I'll post that in the chat. And also, I want to invite you to visit us at Spaced Out Toastmasters. We meet the second Saturday of every month. The next one is going to be on June 12th. It'll be at 7 o'clock at Spring Creek Barbecue in League City and also on Zoom. You can visit our website for more information. I posted a link in the chat. And I also posted my email. You don't have to just tell me that you don't want to be in the ebook. If you want to talk to me about anything else, feel free to email me anytime. And with that, I will turn the virtual lectern back over to Joe Ida.
Thank you, Andrea, for that awesome presentation, something we can all use moving forward. Do we have any last questions for Andrea? Don't be shy. Well, with that, let's call it a wrap, Andrea. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We appreciate you so much. Andrea, thank you for the great presentation. Great information. Any
Yes,
last
great.
feedback?
Great information. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. This was a group effort, and I really appreciate everybody participating today. Now, on to Saturday, right?
Yes, please don't forget to fill out those surveys. We appreciate it.
Will do. Thank
Everyone?
you. Have a good weekend.
Have a good one.